Have you ever had that moment when your entire world shifts, but you're still pretending everything is normal? When you're smiling and nodding, but inside something has fundamentally changed. That was me. Standing in aisle 7 of Peterson's grocery, staring at my husband of 7 years holding hands with another woman. My name is Emelia Johnson. I'm 28 years old and I work as a bank teller at First National. It's not the most exciting job, but it pays the bills and gives me decent hours to spend with my daughter Clara. She's 7 years old and the absolute light of my life. Smart, funny, and way too observant for her own good sometimes. My husband Ryan is 30, and he's a manager at Hartwell Manufacturing. We've been married for 7 years together since we were teenagers. I was 18 and he was 22 when we got serious. Back then I thought I'd found my forever person. Now I'm not so sure about anything. Friday evening, Ryan came home looking tired. He loosened his tie and sat down at our small kitchen table where Clara was doing her homework. "Hey, honey," he said to me, barely looking up. "I've got a business meeting tomorrow, Saturday afternoon." I paused, my hands still in the soapy dishwater. "Again?" I asked. "The directors are only available on weekends," he said quickly. "You know how it is, corporate stuff." I turned to face him, drying my hands on a dish towel. "What time?" 2 to 10, he said. "Might run even later. They mentioned grabbing dinner at some restaurant afterward to discuss quarterly projections." 8 hours? I asked. "For a meeting?" "It's a big presentation," he said, already getting up from the table. "Don't wait up for me. I'll probably be exhausted when I get home." Clara looked up from her math worksheet. "Daddy, you work too much on weekends," she said. Ryan ruffled her hair. "Just trying to provide for my girls," he said with a forced smile. Saturday morning came too quickly. I made breakfast while Ryan slept in until around 11. When he finally got up, he took his time showering and getting dressed like he was going on a date, rather than sitting in a conference room for 8 hours. He wore his good jeans and the blue button-down I'd bought him for his birthday, not exactly meeting attire, but what did I know about corporate presentations? "See you tonight," he said, kissing my forehead. "Take care of Clara." "I always do," I said. He left around 1 o'clock, and I found myself staring out the window as his car disappeared down our street. Something felt off, but I couldn't put my finger on what. "Mommy," Clara called from the living room, "I need supplies for my school project. And can we have fried chicken and mashed potatoes for dinner? Please?" I walked into the living room where she was sprawled on the carpet with colored pencils scattered around her. "What kind of supplies?" I asked. "Poster board and markers. Mrs. Henderson wants us to make a family tree," she said, "and I'm really craving your famous fried chicken." I laughed. "Famous? Since when is my fried chicken famous?" "Since forever," she said seriously. "And your creamy mashed potatoes, too. Not the fast food kind. The real kind that you make." All right, I said. "Go get ready. We're going to the supermarket." "Really?" She jumped up, grinning. "Really? But you're helping me carry the groceries," I said. "Deal," she said, already running toward her room. 20 minutes later, we were in the car heading to Peterson's grocery. Clara chattered about her school project the entire drive, explaining why she needed to trace our family back 3 generations. I half listened, my mind wandering to Ryan and his mysterious weekend meetings that seemed to be happening more and more often lately. Peterson's was busy for a Saturday afternoon. Clara skipped ahead of me, grabbing a shopping cart that was almost as big as she was. "Okay, chicken first," I said, pulling out my phone to check my shopping list. "Then we'll get the potatoes." And that's when I saw them. Ryan was standing near the wine section with a woman I recognized from his company picnic last year. Reese something. She worked in customer service, I remembered. They were standing close together, too close, examining a bottle of red wine like it was the most fascinating thing in the world. My first thought was relief. See? He really was with coworkers. Maybe they were shopping for the dinner he'd mentioned. Then I saw their hands. He was holding hers, their fingers intertwined, his thumb gently stroking across her knuckles. It was intimate, familiar, the way he used to hold my hand when we were teenagers. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure Clara could hear it, but she was distracted by a display of cookies shaped like cartoon characters. I lifted my phone and took a picture. I don't know why. Instinct, maybe. Evidence. Proof that this moment was real and not some horrible daydream. They were looking at steaks now, Reese pointing at different cuts while Ryan nodded. Planning their romantic dinner, I realized. The dinner that was supposed to be a business meeting at some restaurant. Before I could stop myself, I was walking toward them. Clara followed behind with our cart, still distracted by the cookie display. As I got closer, I called out, "Ryan!" They both jumped apart like they'd been shocked, Ryan spinning around while Reese stepped back and pretended to study a package of ground beef. "Emelia," he said, his face pale, "what are you doing here?" "Shopping for dinner," I said, gesturing to Clara. "Clara needed some things, and we're making fried chicken tonight." Right, he said, his eyes darting between me and Reese. "This is Reese from work. Reese, this is my wife, Emelia." "Nice to meet you," Reese said, extending her hand with a fake smile. "Likewise," I said, shaking it briefly. "Getting snacks for your meeting?" "Yes," Ryan said quickly, "just some snacks." I looked pointedly at their cart. "Wine and steaks? That's quite a snack selection." "We thought we might cook something later," Reese said. "After the meeting. Team building, you know?" "How thoughtful," I said. "But since you're buying steak anyway, we might as well have it tonight. Save me a trip to the meat counter." I reached into their cart and pulled out the steaks and the wine. "Clara, sweetie, can you put these in our cart?" "Emelia," Ryan started. "It's perfect timing," I said. "We're making steaks tonight, then?" "Good thinking. Let's go pay for this so I can take it home and you can go ahead and buy your snacks." I smiled at Reese. "I'll see you home tonight, yes? Dinner will be ready at 7. Ryan looked like a deer caught in headlights. "I told you the meeting might run until 10. "By then you'll miss dinner," I said simply. "Your choice." I waited while he paid for our steaks and wine, Reese standing awkwardly to the side. When the transaction was complete, I took the bag from him. "Thank you, honey," I said, rising up on my toes to kiss his cheek. "Have fun at your meeting." As Clara and I walked away, I could hear them talking in urgent whispers behind us. But I didn't look back. I had what I needed. Proof, steaks for dinner, and the satisfaction of watching Reese realize that she wasn't in control of this situation. I was in control. The drive home was quiet. Clara had fallen asleep in her car seat, clutching the poster board we'd picked up for her school project. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see Ryan's car following us, but the road behind us was empty. Once we were home, I carried Clara inside and settled her on the couch with her art supplies. She was still drowsy, but happy to work on her family tree project. I busied myself putting away the groceries, my hands shaking slightly as I placed the steaks in the refrigerator. I needed to know for sure. I needed confirmation that what I'd witnessed wasn't some elaborate misunderstanding. I picked up the phone and dialed Ryan's work number. My heart pounded as it rang once, twice, 3 times. "Hartwell Manufacturing, this is Sarah," a woman's voice answered. Sarah, the CEO's secretary. I'd met her once at the company Christmas party. "Hi, Sarah, this is Emelia Johnson, Ryan's wife," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Is Ryan around? I wanted to ask him something about dinner tonight." There was a pause. "Oh, hi, Emelia. I'm sorry, but Ryan isn't here today. It's Saturday, you know." "Oh," I said, pretending to be confused. "He mentioned he had a meeting today. A powwow with the directors?" "A powwow?" Sarah sounded genuinely puzzled. "Well, there is an executive meeting happening right now, but that's just the CEO and the top directors. Managers aren't included in those weekend sessions. Ryan's department usually has their meetings on Monday mornings, right after the executive team wraps up their weekend planning." My stomach dropped. "Monday mornings?" "Yes, that's the usual schedule," she said kindly. "Are you sure he said today? Maybe he meant something else?" "Maybe," I managed to say. "Thanks, Sarah. I must have misunderstood." "No problem, dear. Have a good weekend," she said. I hung up the phone with trembling hands. There it was. Confirmation. Ryan had lied about everything. There was no meeting. There never had been. I sank into a kitchen chair, staring at the steaks I'd taken from their cart. The evidence was right there in my refrigerator, the dinner they'd planned to share while I thought my husband was working late. "Mommy, are you okay?" Clara asked from the living room. I'm fine, sweetie, I called back, wiping my eyes before she could see. And just thinking about dinner. The next few hours crawled by. I helped Clara with her project, started preparing the fried chicken she'd requested, and tried to act normal. But inside, I was falling apart. 7 years of marriage, and he was lying to my face. How long had this been going on? How many other meetings had there been? At 5 o'clock, I heard Ryan's car in the driveway. He was early, 2 hours early. I stood at the kitchen window, watching him walk up the front path. He looked nervous, checking his phone, glancing toward the house like he was afraid of what he might find inside. The front door opened and Ryan stepped in, hanging his keys on the hook by the door. Hey, he called out. I'm home. You're early, I said, not moving from the kitchen. He appeared in the doorway, loosening his tie. Yeah, the meeting got canceled, he said. Some kind of scheduling conflict. I turned to face him, studying his expression. Canceled? Last-minute thing, he said, avoiding my eyes. You know how corporate is, always changing their minds. That's too bad, I said quietly. Good thing I got those steaks, though. Dinner's almost ready. Great, he said, but his smile looked strained. I'll just go change. As he headed upstairs, I realized something had shifted. He was scared. Not guilty, scared. Maybe he knew me better than I thought. Maybe he recognized the look in my eyes at the store and realized that his calm, quiet wife wasn't going to let this go. He was right to be scared, because I wasn't done investigating. Not even close. Dinner was ready by 6:30. I'd prepared Clara's requested fried chicken and mashed potatoes, along with the steaks that Ryan and Reese had picked out together. The irony wasn't lost on me. We were eating the meal they'd planned to share. Smells amazing in here, Ryan said as he came downstairs, now dressed in casual clothes. He'd showered again, I noticed. Washing off her perfume, maybe? Thank you, I said, setting the plates on our small dining table. Clara, dinner's ready. She bounded into the dining room, her family tree project temporarily forgotten. Wow, Mommy, you made steaks too? Daddy picked them out, I said, glancing at Ryan. Didn't you, honey? Yeah, he said quietly, taking his usual seat. They looked good at the store. We ate in relative silence for the first few minutes. Clara chattered about her school project, while Ryan and I made polite conversation about work and weekend plans. It felt surreal, like we were playing house, pretending to be a normal family. Then Clara looked up from cutting her chicken, her brow furrowed in thought. Daddy, she said suddenly, why were you holding that lady's hand at the store today? Ryan choked on his water, coughing violently. I reached over to pat his back, my heart racing. What lady, sweetheart? I asked, though I knew exactly what she was talking about. The lady with Daddy at the grocery store, Clara said matter-of-factly. They were holding hands by the wine bottles. Is she your girlfriend, Daddy? The silence that followed was deafening. Ryan's face had gone completely pale, and he kept opening and closing his mouth like a fish out of water. We weren't, he stammered. I saw you, Clara insisted. You were holding hands just like Mommy and Daddy do, but Mommy is the only hands you should hold. That's what being married means, right? I felt my chest tighten. My 7-year-old daughter understood fidelity better than my 30-year-old husband. Clara, sweetie, Ryan finally managed to say, his voice strained. We were just... I don't like her, Clara announced, stabbing a piece of chicken with her fork. She's a bad person. Why do you think she's bad? I asked gently, even though my heart was breaking. Because she's holding Daddy's hand when she's not supposed to. Clara said with the brutal honesty only children possess. And it made you sad, Mommy, I could tell. I blinked back tears. Even Clara had noticed my pain. I don't want you to see her anymore, Daddy, Clara continued, looking directly at Ryan. Promise me you won't see the bad lady again. Ryan looked trapped, his eyes darting between Clara and me. Clara, it's complicated. No, it's not, she said simply. You're married to Mommy. You should only hold Mommy's hands. Promise me, Daddy. Ryan started, then stopped. He couldn't promise. We all knew it. Clara's face fell. You won't promise? It's grown-up stuff, Clara, he said weakly. I'm not stupid, she said, her voice getting smaller. I know what it means when you can't promise. I reached over and squeezed Clara's hand. Finish your dinner, baby, I said softly. The rest of the meal passed in uncomfortable silence. Clara picked at her food, occasionally shooting disappointed looks at her father. Ryan couldn't meet either of our eyes, and I sat there, watching my family fall apart over steaks that another woman had helped choose. When Clara excused herself to go watch TV, Ryan and I were left alone at the table. "She's just a kid," he said finally. "She doesn't understand." "She understands enough," I said, stacking the dirty plates. "She understands loyalty. She understands promises. Apparently, she understands marriage better than you do." "Emelia, please," he said. "Don't," I said, standing up. "Just don't. Clean up the kitchen when you're done. I'm going to help Clara with her homework." As I walked toward the living room, I heard him call my name, but I didn't turn around. Clara was curled up on the couch, her family tree spread out in front of her, but she wasn't working on it. She was just staring at the paper. "You okay, baby?" I asked, sitting down next to her. She looked up at me with those big, innocent eyes that seemed far too wise for her age. "Mommy, is Daddy going to leave us for the bad lady?" The question hit me like a punch to the stomach. "I don't know, sweetheart," I said honestly, "but whatever happens, you and I will always have each other, okay?" She nodded and curled up against my side. "I love you, Mommy." "I love you too, baby," I whispered, kissing the top of her head. "More than anything in the world." From the dining room, I could hear Ryan clearing the table, his movements slow and deliberate, but I didn't care about his guilt or his discomfort anymore. All that mattered was the little girl in my arms who just watched her father choose someone else over his family. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I started planning not just for answers, but for what came next. The rest of the evening passed in a haze of forced normalcy. Clara finished her family tree project while I helped her trace the branches of our family history. It felt bitterly ironic, drawing connections that might soon be severed. "Here's Grandma Rose," Clara said, carefully writing my mother's name on one of the branches. "I wish I could have met her." "She would have loved you so much," I said, my voice catching slightly. My mother had died when I was 18, just 3 months before Ryan and I got engaged. She never got to see me walk down the aisle or hold her granddaughter. "Tell me the story about how she met Grandpa again," Clara said, settling back against my arm. I hesitated. It wasn't a happy story, not really. My father had left when I was 12, running off with a woman from his office. My mother never recovered. She spent the next 6 years working 2 jobs, raising me alone, and slowly fading away until cancer finally took what was left of her broken heart. "Maybe another time, baby," I said. "It's getting late." After Clara's bath and bedtime story, the house fell quiet. Ryan had been unusually helpful with the dishes and evening routine, probably trying to ease the tension from dinner. But I could feel him watching me, waiting for me to bring up Clara's questions or the awkwardness at the grocery store. I wasn't going to give him that satisfaction. By 10 o'clock, we were both in bed, lying on our respective sides in the darkness. This was usually when we'd talk about our day, share small intimacies, maybe watch a show together. Instead, the silence stretched between us like a chasm. Ryan whispered finally. "About today?" I kept my breathing steady and even, pretending to be asleep. I'd learned this trick as a child, listening to my parents fight in the next room, knowing that staying invisible was sometimes the safest option. "I know you're upset about Clara's questions," he continued, his voice barely audible. "She just misunderstood what she saw. Kids don't always interpret things correctly." I bit my tongue to keep from responding. Misunderstood? Clara had seen exactly what happened. The mattress shifted as Ryan moved closer. I felt his arm slide around my waist, pulling me against his chest in the familiar position we'd shared for 7 years. Usually I would melt into him, fitting perfectly into the curve of his body. It was our nightly ritual, our way of reconnecting after whatever small stresses the day had brought. But not tonight. Tonight, those arms felt foreign, contaminated. I knew they'd held another woman just hours before. I knew they had caressed someone else's skin, someone else's hair. The thought made me feel physically sick. I remained rigid, every muscle in my body resistant to his touch. "I love you, Em," he whispered against my hair. "You know that, right?" Those words that used to make me feel safe and cherished, now felt like lies whispered in the dark. I closed my eyes tighter and thought about my mother. I remembered finding her crying at the kitchen table when she thought I was asleep, clutching one of my father's old shirts. I remembered how she used to stare at the phone, hoping he would call. How she would make his favorite dinner on his birthday for 3 years after he left, as if he might somehow come home. How she withered away, becoming a shell of the vibrant woman she'd once been. I had promised myself, standing at her funeral while my father lurked awkwardly in the back row, that I would never let a man destroy me like that. I would never become a ghost of myself, waiting for someone who had already chosen to leave. Ryan's arm tightened around me, probably confused by my lack of response. Usually, I would turn in his arms, kiss his cheek, whisper, "I love you too," into the darkness. Tonight, I lay there like a stone, counting my breaths, planning my next moves. Because unlike my mother, I wasn't going to wait around to see how this story ended. I was going to write it myself. "Em," he whispered one more time, uncertainty creeping into his voice. But I had nothing left to say to him. Not tonight. Maybe not ever again. I waited until I was certain he was deep in sleep, his breathing heavy and regular. Then, moving as carefully as possible, I lifted his arm from my waist and slipped out of bed. The floorboards creaked softly under my feet and I froze, but Ryan didn't stir. His phone was charging on the nightstand, face down like always. My heart pounded as I picked it up, expecting it to be locked. But when I touched the screen, it opened immediately. He'd never bothered with a passcode, another sign of how careless he'd become, how confident he was that I would never suspect. I opened his messages, and there it was. A conversation thread with Reese W. that made my stomach drop. The messages went back months. "Reese, can't wait to see you Saturday. This sneaking around is getting harder." Ryan, "I know, baby, but it's worth it. You're worth it." Reese, "Did Emelia suspect anything about last weekend?" Ryan, "She doesn't have a clue. She trusts me completely." Reese, "Good. I was worried when she called your name at the store today." Ryan, "That was too close. We need to be more careful." I can't stop thinking about last time. Your skin, your hands. I had to stop reading. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone, but I forced myself to scroll up to see how far back it went. January, February, March. This had been going on for at least 6 months. 6 months of lies. 6 months of work meetings and late nights at the office. 6 months of him coming home to me and Clara, kissing my forehead, helping with homework, making love to me while thinking about her. I forwarded the most damning messages to my own phone, my fingers moving automatically even as my vision blurred with tears. Evidence. I needed evidence. When I was done, I carefully placed his phone back exactly where I'd found it and crept toward the bathroom. I closed the door as quietly as possible and turned on the shower, letting the sound of rushing water mask what was coming. Then I stepped under the hot spray and finally let myself break. The sobs came hard and fast, months of suppressed intuition and ignored red flags crashing over me like a wave. I slid down the shower wall until I was sitting on the floor, letting the water wash over me as I cried for the marriage I'd thought I had, for the man I'd thought I'd married, for the family I'd thought we were building together. I cried for my mother, who'd sat in this same kind of despair 20 years ago, and for Clara, who might have to grow up the way I did. I cried for all the nights I'd lain beside him, grateful for his presence, while he was planning to be somewhere else. But most of all, I cried for the naive woman I'd been just hours ago, the one who still believed her husband when he said he was working late. When there were no tears left, I stood up and turned off the water. I dried myself methodically, hung up the towel, and walked back to the bedroom where my cheating husband slept peacefully, unaware that his world was about to change. I slipped back into bed, careful not to wake him, and stared at the ceiling until dawn. Tomorrow, I would start making plans. Real plans. For me and for Clara. But tonight, I mourned the marriage that was already over, even if he didn't know it yet. I must have dozed off somewhere around 5 in the morning, because the next thing I knew, Clara's alarm was going off. My head felt like it was splitting in two, and my eyes were so swollen I could barely open them. Every part of my body ached like I'd been hit by a truck. But Clara needed breakfast, and Ryan would expect his coffee and toast just like every other Monday morning for the past 7 years. So I got up, splashed cold water on my face, and went downstairs to play the part of the perfect wife and mother one more time. "Good morning, baby," I said to Clara as she stumbled into the kitchen in her pajamas, her hair sticking up in all directions. "Morning, Mommy," she mumbled, rubbing her eyes. Then she looked at me more closely, her brow furrowing. "Mommy, what happened to your eyes?" I turned away quickly, focusing on scrambling the eggs. "Just allergies, sweetheart. You know how I get sometimes." But Clara was too smart, too observant. She studied my face with those wise 7-year-old eyes, and I could see her connecting dots I didn't want her to connect. Ryan came downstairs a few minutes later, already dressed for work, checking his phone, probably looking for messages from her, I thought bitterly. "Morning," he said, not really looking at any of us. "Breakfast is ready," I said, setting plates on the table. "I'll go get ready too." That's when he finally looked at me properly, and I watched his face change. His eyes widened as he took in my swollen red-rimmed eyes and pale complexion. Are you okay?" he asked, genuine concern in his voice. "You look—" "I'm fine," I said quickly, "just tired." But I could see the wheels turning in his head. He knew me well enough to recognize the aftermath of a night spent crying. And given everything that had happened yesterday, Clara's questions, the grocery store encounter, the uncomfortable dinner, he had to be wondering what I'd figured out. "Clara, go get dressed for school," I said. "The bus will be here in 20 minutes. As Clara trudged upstairs, Ryan kept staring at me. I could feel his eyes following me as I moved around the kitchen, and I knew he was calculating, trying to figure out how much danger he was in. When Clara came back down, backpack in hand, she gave me an extra long hug. "I love you, Mommy," she whispered in my ear. "I love you too, baby," I whispered back, holding her tight. After she left for the bus, the kitchen fell silent except for the sound of Ryan finishing his coffee. He was watching me again, that worried, almost scared expression on his face. I think he knew. Not the specifics, he had no idea I'd gone through his phone, but he could sense that something fundamental had shifted. He'd grown up knowing my story, knowing what my father had done to us. And now he was doing the same thing to me and Clara. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. "I should get ready for work," I said, heading toward the stairs. Wait," he called after me. I paused but didn't turn around. "Maybe you should call in sick today," he said quietly. "You really don't look well." "I'm fine," I repeated. But as I climbed the stairs, I could feel my composure cracking again. By the time I reached the bathroom, I was barely holding it together. I turned on the shower and stepped under the hot water, hoping it would wash away the heaviness in my chest. But instead of feeling better, the emotions hit me even harder than they had the night before. Maybe it was the exhaustion, or maybe it was the way Clara had looked at me with such worry. But I found myself sobbing all over again. I tried to stop, tried to pull myself together and get ready for work like a normal person. But every time I thought I had control, another wave of grief would crash over me. I got out of the shower, dried off, and tried to put on my makeup. But my hands were shaking too badly, and my eyes were getting redder instead of better. I stumbled back into the shower, letting the water run over me as I cried some more. A knock on the bathroom door made me freeze. Ryan's voice was muffled through the wood. "Are you okay? You've been in there for almost an hour." I looked at the clock on the shower wall and realized he was right. It was already 8:30. He should have left for work by now. "Do we need to talk?" he asked, his voice smaller now, uncertain. The question hung in the air between us. Do we need to talk? About his affair? About the lies? About the fact that our marriage was over and we both knew it? "Just leave me alone," I called back, my voice hoarse from crying. "You'll be late for work." There was a long pause. Then I heard his footsteps moving away from the door, down the stairs, and finally the sound of the front door closing. I stayed in the shower for another 20 minutes, until the hot water ran out and I was forced to face the day. But when I finally got out and looked at myself in the mirror, I knew I couldn't go to work like this. I called in sick for the first time in 3 years, claiming a migraine. It wasn't entirely a lie. Then I sat on my bed in my bathrobe, staring at my phone at the messages I'd forwarded to myself in the middle of the night. Evidence of my husband's betrayal, saved in my text thread like a collection of tiny daggers. I had decisions to make. plans to create, a future to figure out for me and Clara. But first, I needed to stop crying long enough to think clearly. And that was going to be harder than I thought. The next few weeks passed in a strange sort of limbo. On the surface, everything returned to what looked like normal. Ryan, probably panicked by my breakdown that Monday morning, threw himself into being the perfect husband and father. He came home early from work, helped Clara with her homework without being asked, brought me flowers just because, and didn't mention a single weekend work meeting. For about 2 weeks, he played the role of devoted family man so convincingly that I almost wondered if I'd imagined the whole thing. Almost. But I had those text messages saved on my phone, and I had something else that Ryan had apparently forgotten about: access to all our financial accounts. Working at a bank has its advantages. I knew how to read statements, how to track spending patterns, how to spot unusual activity. And Ryan, in his arrogance, had never bothered to change the login credentials for his personal account that I'd helped him set up years ago. Every day during my lunch break, I would log into his banking app and watch the evidence pile up. Hotel charges, restaurant bills for two, cash withdrawals that didn't match his usual spending patterns. The dates told the story. Every Saturday for months, sometimes Fridays too. I took screenshots of everything, created a folder on my phone labeled tax documents, where I saved all the evidence: bank statements, credit card charges, screenshots of text messages. I was building a case, methodically and quietly. The strange part was how calm I felt about it all. Those first few nights had wrung all the tears out of me. I'd grieved for my marriage, mourned the life I thought we were building, and then I'd simply moved on. I actually surprised myself with how quickly the pain had transformed into something else. Not anger, exactly. More like cold determination. I wasn't my mother. I wouldn't spend years hoping for a man who'd already chosen someone else. I had Clara to think about now, and she deserved better than a broken home held together by lies. Ryan must have thought his charm offensive was working, because after those 2 weeks of perfect behavior, he started slipping back into old patterns. A client dinner here, a late meeting there. But he was more careful now, more subtle. Then came the Saturday he thought he'd earned enough trust back to try the powwow excuse again. "I know it's been a while since I've had weekend work," he said over breakfast, not quite meeting my eyes. "But the directors need to discuss the quarterly budget. Might run late. You know how these things go." I nodded and smiled, spooning more scrambled eggs onto Clara's plate. "Of course, honey. Will you be home for dinner?" Same old excuses, nothing new. "Probably not until around 10, he said, relief obvious in his voice. He thought I was back to being the trusting wife who never questioned his schedule. "That's fine," I said. "Clara and I will have a girls' night." "Won't we, baby?" Clara nodded enthusiastically, but I caught her glancing between her father and me with that too perceptive look she'd been wearing lately. My daughter was getting better at reading the tension in the room, even when we tried to hide it. Later that morning, while Ryan was in the shower getting ready to leave, his phone buzzed with a text message on the kitchen counter. I glanced at it automatically. The message was from Reese. "Can't wait to see you tonight. I made reservations at Marcello's for 7:30. Can't believe it's been 3 weeks since we've had a real date. This sneaking around is killing me." Marcello's, the upscale Italian place downtown that Ryan had taken me to for our anniversary 3 years ago, where he'd told me he loved me more than anything in the world and promised we'd grow old together. I stared at the message until the screen went dark. Ryan emerged from the bathroom a few minutes later, grabbed his phone, kissed my forehead, and left around noon, dressed in his good jeans and that blue shirt again. The same outfit he'd worn to meet Reese at the grocery store all those weeks ago. He drove away with no idea that I was already 3 steps ahead of him. I calmly walked to the living room and sat down next to Clara. "Hey, sweetheart," I said, keeping my voice light. "How would you feel about staying at Aunt Jenny's for a few hours tonight?" Clara looked up from her show, eyes brightening. "Sure, Mom." Jenny was my coworker and closest friend, and her daughter was in Clara's class. I'd been careful not to confide in anyone about what was happening, but I knew Jenny would take Clara for the night without too many questions. "Let me call her and see," I said, already reaching for my phone. 30 minutes later, Clara was packed and excited about going to Jenny's. After I dropped her off at Jenny's, I drove straight home and called Marcelo's. "Good evening, Marcelo's. This is Maria speaking." "Hi," I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. "I'd like to make a reservation for tonight if possible, for one person." "Certainly. What time would work for you?" I thought about Reese's text. They'd be arriving at 7:30. "How about 8 o'clock? "Perfect. And the name for the reservation?" I hesitated for just a moment. "Johnson," I said finally. "Emelia Johnson." "Wonderful, Mrs. Johnson. We'll see you at 8. I hung up and looked at myself in the hallway mirror. After weeks of gathering evidence and planning, tonight I would finally see them together with my own eyes. Not hiding in grocery store aisles or reading about it in text messages, but watching them play sweethearts in the restaurant where my husband had once promised to love me forever. I felt nothing but calm resolve. The grieving was over. Tonight was about getting the final piece of evidence I needed to move forward with my life. Tonight was about taking control of my own story. I arrived at Marcelo's at exactly 8 o'clock, dressed in my best black dress and heels. I'd taken care with my makeup and hair. If I was going to end my marriage tonight, I was going to do it looking like the strong, capable woman I'd become. "Good evening, Mrs. Johnson." The maitre d' greeted me with a warm smile. "Right this way." He led me to a small table in the corner, perfect for what I had planned. From my seat, I had a clear view of the entire dining room, and it didn't take long to spot them. There they are, acting like a real couple, like we'd never existed. They're at a table near the window, the same table where Ryan had proposed to me 7 years ago. They were leaning across the table toward each other, fingers intertwined, completely absorbed in their own little world. Reese was wearing a red dress that hugged her curves, and Ryan looked happier than I'd seen him in months. The sight of them should have hurt. 3 weeks ago it would have destroyed me. But as I watched them whisper and laugh like teenagers in love, all I felt was a strange sort of peace. This was confirmation of what I already knew. This was closure. "Can I start you with something to drink?" the waitress asked. "A glass of the house red, please," I said, never taking my eyes off their table, "and I'll have the chicken marsala." For the next hour, I ate my dinner and watched my husband fall in love with someone else. I saw him stroke her hand the way he used to stroke mine. I watched him lean in to whisper something that made her laugh, the same intimate gesture he'd once reserved for me. When the waitress brought dessert to their table, tiramisu his favorite, he fed her a bite from his own fork. I discreetly pulled out my phone and started recording these two cheating bastards, capturing their intimate moments, their laughter, the way they gazed at each other like lovesick teenagers. Every stolen touch, every whispered secret, every bite of shared dessert, all of it documented for the courts to see. I ordered a second glass of wine and watched them some more, taking mental notes, memorizing details. They were so absorbed in each other, completely lost in their own little world. By 9:30, I'd finished my meal and my wine, and I was ready. I pulled the manila envelope from my purse, the divorce papers I'd picked up from my lawyer, and stood up. It was time to end this charade. I walked across the restaurant with steady, measured steps. They were so absorbed in each other that they didn't notice me approaching until I was standing right beside their table. "Good evening," I said pleasantly. They both looked up, and I watched the blood drain from their faces. Ryan's mouth fell open and Reese's hand jerked away from his like she'd been burned. "Emelia," Ryan breathed, his voice barely a whisper. How did you? Enjoying your business dinner?" I asked, pulling out my phone. Before either of them could react, I snapped a photo of them sitting there, guilt written all over their faces. "Oh wait, let me get a better one." I moved around to capture the romantic table setting, the half-empty wine glasses, the dessert they'd been sharing. Then I moved back to get another shot of their panicked expressions. "Emelia, please," Ryan started, half rising from his chair. "Let me explain." "No need," I said calmly, setting the manila envelope on the table between them. I think I understand perfectly. 6 or 7 months? That's how long this has been going on? Reese had gone completely pale, but her eyes flashed with something like defiance. You don't understand, she said. Ryan and I— Yeah, you are in love, I finished for her. Yes, I can see that. It's actually quite sweet. They both stared at me like I'd lost my mind. Those are divorce papers, I continued, nodding toward the envelope. I need you to sign them, Ryan. Tonight. Leave them on my dresser when you come home to pack your things. Pack my things? He echoed. The house belongs to me. That, I said matter-of-factly. It was my mother's, remember? You'll need to find somewhere else to live. I'm sure Reese would be happy to help with that. Reese finally found her voice. You can't just— Actually, I can, I said, turning to face her directly. And Reese, I'll be seeing you in court. My lawyer is very interested in discussing alienation of affection laws. Her face went even paler. I looked back at Ryan, who was still staring at me in shock. Clara is with Jenny, so you have some time to think about how you want to explain this to our daughter. I suggest you choose your words carefully. Wait, he said, reaching for me. We need to talk about this. I know I made mistakes, but the time for talking was months ago, I said, stepping back from his reach. When you decided to start this affair instead of working on our marriage. You made your choice, Ryan. Now I'm making mine. I looked at both of them one last time. These two people who had blown up my life while I was making their dinner and doing their laundry and believing their lies. Enjoy the rest of your evening, I said, and congratulations, you two deserve each other. Then I walked away, my heels clicking against the marble floor, my head held high. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. That chapter of my life was over. As I reached the exit, I heard Ryan call my name, but I didn't stop. Then I heard something else, the sound of clapping. I turned slightly to see 4 women at a nearby table applauding, their faces full of approval and support. One of them, a woman about my mother's age, raised her wine glass in a silent toast. Another gave me a thumbs up and mouthed, "Good for you." The validation from complete strangers hit me harder than I expected. These women had witnessed my moment of strength, and they were celebrating it with me. I smiled at them, nodded my thanks, and walked out into the cool night air, feeling something I hadn't felt in months. Freedom. I picked up Clara from Jenny's house around 10:30, thanking my friend for the last-minute babysitting without offering much explanation. Jenny could probably read the tension in my face, but she was kind enough not to ask questions. Did you have fun, baby? I asked Clara as we drove home through the quiet streets. Yeah, she said, but her voice was small. She was studying my face in the rearview mirror with those wise eyes of hers. Mommy, are you okay? I glanced back at her, this perceptive little girl who'd been watching our family fall apart for weeks. I'm okay, sweetheart. Why? You look different, she said quietly. And I think I know why Daddy's been lying. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. What do you mean? He's still seeing the bad lady, isn't he? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper, even though I asked him not to, even though he knows it makes you cry. I pulled into our driveway and turned off the engine, taking a deep breath before turning to face her. Clara, I'm sorry, Mommy, she said, tears starting to float on her cheeks. I'm sorry Daddy is being mean to you. I'm sorry you don't really have allergies. I'm sorry I can't make him stop. My heart broke all over again, but not for me this time, for this innocent little girl who'd been carrying the weight of our broken family on her 7-year-old shoulders. Oh, baby, I said, getting out and opening her door. I unbuckled her seatbelt and pulled her into my arms. None of this is your fault. Do you hear me? None of it. She clung to me, sobbing into my shoulder. I just want to be with you, Mommy. I don't care if Daddy leaves. I just want to stay with you. You'll always be with me, I whispered, carrying her toward the house. No matter what happens, you and I are a team. Always. When we reached the front door, I could see lights on inside. My stomach clenched. Ryan was home, probably trying to figure out how to explain himself, how to minimize what I'd seen. I opened the door to find him sitting on the couch in the living room, still wearing his dinner clothes, the divorce papers spread out on the coffee table in front of him. He looked up as we entered, his eyes red and desperate. Please, we need to talk about this. Clara lifted her head from my shoulder and looked at her father with a mixture of sadness and disappointment that was devastating to witness. "Clara, sweetheart," I said gently, "why don't you go to your room? Mommy and Daddy need to have a grown-up conversation." She shook her head, holding on to me tighter. "I don't want to leave you alone with him." "It's okay," I assured her. "Just for a little while. I promise I'll come check on you in a few minutes." Reluctantly, she let me set her down, but she didn't move toward the stairs. Ryan said, standing up. "I know how this looks, but I know you never had meetings on Saturdays," I said calmly. "I called and confirmed that weeks ago. Whoever told me the truth is none of your business." His face went pale. You knew?" "I saw everything," I continued. "The text messages, the bank statements, the hotel charges every weekend. Did you really think I wouldn't figure it out eventually?" "I wanted to tell you," he said weakly. I didn't know how." "You didn't want to tell me," I corrected him. "You wanted to have both, your family at home and your girlfriend on the weekends. But that's not how it works." "It's not that simple." "Yes, it is," I said firmly. "You made a choice. Every day for 7 months, you chose her over us. I can't live with someone who's in love with someone else. I can't let you touch me with hands that have been all over another woman." That's when we heard it, a soft sob from the stairs. Clara was sitting on the bottom step, tears streaming down her face. "Dad," she said, her voice breaking, "you're still seeing that bad person, aren't you? Why won't you just stop?" Ryan looked at his daughter, then at me, then back at Clara. It's complicated, sweetheart." "No, it's not," Clara said, standing up. "You're supposed to love only Mommy. You're supposed to be with us." "I do love you both," he said, "but you love her more." Clara said with heartbreaking clarity, "That's why you keep seeing her even when I asked you not to." I walked over and hugged Clara again. "Baby, can you please go to your room now, just for a little bit?" She shook her head. "What if you leave me too? What if you go away like Daddy wants to?" "I'm never leaving you," I said firmly. "Never. You're stuck with me forever." "But what if?" "Clara," I said, kneeling down to her level. "Look at me. I promise you, no matter what happens between Daddy and me, you will always be my first priority. Always. Can you trust me on that?" She nodded reluctantly and finally headed upstairs, but I could hear her crying as she went. I turned back to Ryan, who was watching the whole scene with growing horror, probably realizing for the first time how much damage he'd done to his relationship with his daughter. "Sign the papers," I said simply, "or we can go to court and make this much messier. Your choice." Please," he begged. "I don't want to lose you. I don't want to lose Clara. I made a mistake. Months of mistakes," I said. "And I'm done. I want alimony and child support. I want full custody. And I'm not backing down from suing Reese." "You can't sue Reese," he said quickly. "Watch me." I said, she's married too." I stared at him for a long moment, then started laughing. It wasn't a happy laugh. It was the sound of complete disbelief. "She's married too?" I repeated. "You've been having an affair with a married woman? You've destroyed 2 families instead of just one?" "It's not like that," he tried to explain. "Oh boy," I said, still laughing. "You know what? I don't care. Actually, that makes it even better. Her husband deserves to know what kind of person he's married to, just like I deserve to know." "Emelia." "No," I said, pointing toward the stairs. "Get your things and get out. Tonight. You can figure out where to go. Maybe Reese has a couch you can sleep on. But you're not sleeping in my house, in my bed, next to the daughter you've been lying to for months. This is my home too." "No, it's not. It's my mother's house, and it became mine when she died. Check the deed. Your name isn't on it." I picked up the divorce papers from the coffee table. "Sign these and leave them on my dresser, or I'll see you in court. Either way, this marriage is over." He stood there for a moment, looking lost and desperate. "What am I supposed to tell people? What am I supposed to tell Clara?" "Tell them the truth," I said, "that you chose someone else over your family. So that you decided 7 months of sneaking around was worth more than 7 years of marriage and a daughter who used to worship you." I started walking toward the stairs, then turned back. "Oh, and Ryan, don't even think about asking for joint custody. Clara made her choice very clear tonight. She doesn't want to be around you and your girlfriend." As I climbed the stairs to check on my daughter, I could hear him moving around in our room, probably gathering some clothes. but I didn't care where he went or what he did next. My only concern now was the little girl in her bedroom, probably wondering if her whole world was about to fall apart. It was time to show her that sometimes when one world ends, a better one begins. 6 months later, I stood in the doorway of my mother's house one last time before the new owners arrived. The divorce had been surprisingly straightforward. Ryan signed the papers without a fight, probably hoping to avoid the public humiliation of a trial. He agreed to fair child support and a modest amount of alimony, keeping our business out of the courts. But Reese wasn't so lucky. When the process server arrived at her house with my alienation of affection lawsuit, her husband Dan was home. He saw the legal papers, read the details of her 7-month affair, and everything clicked into place. All those Saturday girls' nights and work emergencies suddenly made sense. Reese had been more careful than Ryan, better at covering her tracks, but Dan had suspected something for months. Just like me, he'd been living with that gnawing feeling that something was wrong, that his wife was slipping away from him. Within a week, Dan filed for divorce and his own lawsuit against Ryan for alienation of affection. Unlike Ryan, Dan and Reese didn't have children caught in the middle, which somehow made his betrayal feel even more cruel. She'd risked a good marriage purely for the thrill of sneaking around. The court cases became the talk of our small town. 2 marriages destroyed, 2 lawsuits flying, and the cheating couple forced to face the financial consequences of their actions. Reese ended up paying me $30,000 in damages, while Dan got a similar amount from Ryan. Between the legal fees, the settlements, and their respective divorces, both Ryan and Reese lost most of their savings. They moved in together afterward, finally free to be the couple they'd been pretending to be in secret. But without the excitement of forbidden romance, without the adrenaline rush of sneaking around, their relationship fizzled quickly. Turns out, they'd fallen in love with the idea of the affair, not with each other. I heard through mutual acquaintances that Ryan was miserable. He'd lost his family, his financial security, and his reputation in town. And for what? A woman who got bored with him the moment their relationship became legal and ordinary. I loved my wife, he apparently told anyone who would listen. I loved my daughter. I don't know why I threw it all away. But I knew why. Some people don't appreciate what they have until it's gone. Some people mistake excitement for love, secrets for intimacy, forbidden fruit for something actually worth having. Clara and I had both started therapy to help process everything that had happened. She was doing well, though she still refused to see her father during his court-appointed visitation times. Her therapist said she needed time to work through her feelings of betrayal and abandonment, and I wasn't going to push her. Maybe someday I'll want to see him, she told me one afternoon. But not now. I'm still mad that he picked someone else over us. I understood that feeling completely. As for me, I decided to sell my mother's house. Too many memories lived in those walls, not just of Ryan's betrayal, but of my mother's heartbreak decades earlier. I wanted Clara to grow up somewhere fresh, somewhere that belonged entirely to us. Ready, Mommy? Clara asked, taking my hand. I squeezed her fingers and smiled. Ready. As we walked out the front door together, I didn't look back. That chapter of our story was over. The next one, whatever it held, was going to be honest, authentic, and entirely our own. And for the first time in years, I couldn't wait to see how it would unfold.
If you enjoyed this video, hit that like button and drop a comment below. Don't forget to follow for more content just like this. Thanks for watching. Catch you next time.